Alright, team, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today I want to talk about Remake's choices and, of course, the inevitable dating scene when it comes to Remake Part 2, which in the original FF7, the dating segment and who you went on a date with was really the culmination of the choices you made throughout the game up to that point. So when it came to the original Final Fantasy VII with the dating minigame, there are 4 characters that you can go on a date with at the Gold Saucer. They each start with a certain point value as soon as the game starts, Aerith at 50, Tifa at 30, Yuffie at 10, Barret at 0, and then throughout the game the different dialogue choices and other things that you do will increase and decrease each character's value. Now when it comes to Remake, of course, right now as it stands, we don't entirely know for sure that this is still going to be in the game, but there are several moments throughout the first game that sort of allude to this being a possibility. Maybe the most popular one is whenever Tifa, Aerith, and Cloud all fall down into the sewer before the Abzu fight, and you can choose who you want to wake up first. This would seem to imply that there might be this underlying dating mechanic, just like in the original FF7, because if you talk to Tifa, you get some dialogue with her first, and then Aerith wakes up, and vice versa. If you wake up Aerith first, you and her talk for a little bit, and then Tifa wakes up by herself. And based on the original FF7, that would probably be plus a certain amount of points and minus a certain amount of points for each character, depending on what you did. Another example of this could be like the Chocobo Sam dialogue choices whenever you're looking for Tifa. If you mention that she's in great shape, Aerith's response seems to imply that maybe she didn't really like that, which based on the original game would be at the very least like minus Aerith points, but also potentially plus Tifa points.
She's in great shape.
Is that really important?
But then past this, you have something kind of interesting with the flower scene in Remake versus the original FF7, because in the original Final Fantasy VII, there's a couple of layers of choice here, because for one, you can completely deny buying the flower. You do not get the flower at all in the original FF7, thus, whenever you get to the 7th Heaven, you don't have a flower to give to either Tifa or Marlene, so there's like 2 layers of choices there. But sadly, when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake, you're actually forced to take the flower. Now, when Aerith offers it to you, you do have 2 choices. You can kind of deny it, but she still gives it to you anyway, and then once you get to Sector 7, Cloud automatically gives it to Tifa, and there's not even like the choice to give it to her or Marlene, which makes you wonder that if there is a dating mechanic in Remake that's going to carry over to the next game and stuff, makes you wonder if there's even a choice to have Barret at all, because that's one of the ways you can get Barret points in the original FF7. And then even past all that stuff, you have the character resolution scenes when it comes to Remake outside of Aerith's house, right before you go to the Shinra building. You can either have a conversation with Tifa, Barret, or Aerith. And with this, it's based on what you do, but it's not dialogue choices, sadly. It's more like, I think it's a certain amount of like side quests or something that you do, or events or something along those lines, but still you have a bit of like control over this scene. And then at the end of the game with the Sephiroth fight, who fights alongside you is very dependent on what you do in the Whisper Harbinger fight, and it's actually point-based, which is very reminiscent of the dating mechanic, oddly enough. And the point of all these examples, and there's probably a lot more in the game that I'm not thinking of, these are just kind of off the top of my head, is that the game is pretty layered with choices. Now obviously the choices that you have in Remake aren't like super game-changing, but neither were they in the original FF7, but with the ones you do in Remake, especially the resolution scene you get outside of Aerith's house, lead to some pretty cool conversations that you definitely want to check out if you haven't seen them. But that was the same thing with the original FF7 as well. Like the conversation that you have within like the Gold Saucer like gondola dating scene like is pretty unique, especially for like Tifa and Aerith. Like the Yuffie and Barret ones are kind of joke ones, but they're still interesting to see. And as you play through Final Fantasy VII Remake, and you have all these like minor choices that don't really feel like they impact the story that much or the world that much, they feel like they're leading to something similar to the original FF7, and what makes the most sense, of course, is the dating mechanic, which to me, if there is a dating mechanic, would all but have to guarantee that there's going to be some level of data transfer between games. Now, obviously, you could already do like some, PS4 to PS5 data transfer, and I think that's also a bit of evidence that we're going to have some sort of maybe like save transfer as well for the next game. But if there is a dating mechanic, then they're going to have to carry over whatever dialogue choices and things you made in the first game to the second game. And look, I've seen some people discuss this. Obviously the game is almost 2 years old at this point, and people have said that they don't think it's like plausible for them to have like choices throughout the game that lead to like a different cutscene in the Gold Saucer, and it's way too hard for them to do all these different like cutscenes or dating scenes. And I think that's just kind of ridiculous. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this in the background right here, where like you come here with like Tifa or Aerith or whatever, and you go all throughout the Gold Saucer doing different stuff. Like it could simply just be the gondola scene, and that's just a cutscene, no different than like the resolution scenes we got outside of Aerith's house, right? That's a dedicated cutscene with unique dialogue between all 3 characters that you can talk to. Why can't they do that also for the dating scene? I think that's just kind of absurd. Now, whether or not they're going to have all 4 options like the original game, Tifa, Barret, Aerith, and Yuffie, and whether or not Barret's involved at all, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to go that route. And I say that just because there's not like a whole ton of options that would like be in Barrett's favor that I can remember off of Remake. Obviously, there's the resolution scene and maybe him joining the fight at the end of the game with Sephiroth. But other than that, I don't know. But with like Tifa and Aerith, there seems to be several options throughout the game that could allude to minus or increase of points, if there is even a point system at all. But most I want to do a dedicated video about this because from what I can see on the channel, we haven't. I feel like we've talked about the dating mechanic and points and other things like this and data transfer and shit here on the channel, but not in a dedicated video, which means that if we did talk about it, it was probably in a different video that was talking about several other subjects, and I just probably rambled about this topic a little bit, but I can't find any video on my channel about us talking specifically about the dating mechanic when it comes to Remake. Ultimately, I think that there is going to be something. Now, whether or not it's carrying stuff over from the first game to the second game, whether or not it starts fresh in the second game and whatever you do in that game decides the dating scene in part 2, it could be either one of those. I just think when you really add up all the different dialogue choices and things that you can do within Remake, there's just too much evidence there for there not to be something in the future eventually. But of course, I want to pass it off to you guys. So when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake, how do you think they're going to handle the dating mechanic, dating scene? Is it even going to be in the game? Is it going to be forced? Will you have to go in the dating scene with like specifically Aerith, specifically Tifa, or maybe there's a choice there? And do you think that they're going to carry over any sort of choices that we made in the first game to the second game? What are your thoughts on data transfer and save transfer? Fuck it, we ain't talked about it in a long time anyways. Other than dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. We'll send Dave more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow on Twitter, @DavidYT. I'm a Discord. The links to social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.